Everyone knows that the ACT is coming up, and it can be a very stressful time. Luckily, I'm here with social worker Mr. Jones with some advice on how to help us out. Sometimes I get nervous before and during exams and important events. Is that considered an anxiety problem?
Great question, Sommer, and thanks for having me here today. No, it's actually not, right? So the test anxiety is more of a performance anxiety, okay? So really, I think, what you're questioning is the difference between test anxiety and just generalized anxiety, okay? So generalized anxiety is exactly how it sounds. We worry about things bigger picture, right? Excessive worry, relentless feeling, or you're feeling on edge, right? Physical symptoms and cognitive symptoms, okay? So, if you've ever felt anxious before, you might feel your hands get a little sweaty, right? Stomach a little, nervous, right? A little uneasy. So the big difference between generalized anxiety disorder and test anxiety is that generalized anxiety disorder impacts your everyday life, right? Not just the testing itself, okay? And then test anxiety actually is a specific performance anxiety, like I said, because you're holding yourself to high standards. You might be having pressure from home, right? Pressure from school, to perform so well on this test, that actually test anxiety, is really just focused on a performance anxiety, and then generalized anxiety disorder is really just us being anxious about everyday life.
So is there a difference between somebody who has anxiety for big performance events versus just like in special situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the performance anxiety. It's the same thing that that athletes, encounter. Many people, obviously actors, before they, have a big show, that stress, that little bit of anxiety there, right, helps us perform better, right? But it can also be debilitating at times. And that's kind of when test anxiety comes into play, where, there's so many things that can happen. You can go up there and then all of a sudden, you're so prepared for the test, but you look at the test and all of a sudden, you forget everything, right? And I think it happens to a lot of people, and we don't really talk about it a lot. But honestly, test anxiety can be created and caused by so many different factors too. So there's a difference between stress too, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah. So I think I get it. So do I experience stress because I get test anxiety, or do I get text anxiety because I'm under stress?
That's actually a great point. That's a great question. I feel like they work twofold, right? So you have, obviously when you're stressed, right? Stress is like, it's a short-term event, right? You can be a little stressed about taking a test. I think we all are, right? Math was never my strong suit, right? So if I was told I was getting gonna have to take a math test, I was a little anxious, right? I was a little nervous, right? But I wouldn't say that that's test anxiety, right? That's just normal stress, right? Test anxiety is where, that stress can obviously lead over to test anxiety, I feel, because the fact that, if we're not managing our stress right, that can lead to more anxiety, right? So that being said, like I was saying, stress is a short-term thing, but it can impact that test anxiety, because if we're not taking care of ourselves the way we should, it can actually end up leading to anxiety.
So why do some students experience test anxiety while others don't? I have a friend who almost never studies, but they always do really well.
See, that's kind of funny, and it's funny how it works that way, and I think a lot of it's mental and personal, right? And that's what goes back to the performance part, right? I think a lot of people put more pressure on themselves than they probably need to, right? That kind of perfectionist mentality, right, that we have in a lot of our students, because they just want to perform really well. But that can actually cause, that can cause some major issues, right? If we put too much pressure on ourselves, that can actually lead to a decrease in performance, right? So what I would tell you, right, is, when you're going to take that test, kind of do things to calm yourself down, right? Prepare, right, would be a big thing, over prepare, right? And then when you're already over preparing, then you're going in with a little bit more confidence, right? And then when you're going in with that confidence, that kind of lowers that stress and lowers that anxiety.
That makes sense. Is this why I feel like I freeze up on tests? Sometimes I study and I feel like I know the info inside out, and then I get to the exam and I can't remember things. And even like basic things. A few times right after a test, I'll start to suddenly remember things I couldn't while I was working on the test.
Yeah, and that again just goes back into the, like we were just talking about. It's, it goes into the fact that, that's just when you freeze up, right? And that's what test anxiety. And one thing I would recommend, and I know we've talked about it, at HF in general, especially from the counseling department, is, and the social workers, is kind of mindfulness techniques, right? There's certain techniques you can use to help limit that test anxiety, right? Because there's many impacts of it, right? You have the cognitive impairments, what you're talking about, where all of a sudden you go blank, right? And that can actually, that can cause even more stress in itself. But mindfulness techniques are these techniques that we use to help kind of calm our heart rate, right? Which can help relax our mind, okay? And some of these techniques can be breathing techniques, right? You can, think about 3 things you see in the class, 2 things you hear, 1 thing you smell, little stuff like that can kind of help you focus on something else, not the exam per se, right? And then therefore kind of clear your head and kind of calm you down before you go into the test.
So am I stuck with this problem, or can it be solved?
No, actually, the good thing is I think this problem can definitely be solved. But it takes, just like anything in life, it takes some work, right? It takes some practice, right? And honestly, if you're preparing, if you're studying, if you're, again, practicing relaxation techniques, and the positive thinking is huge, right? I'm a big proponent of, cognitive behavior therapy. And what that is it's really reframing our thoughts, right? And reframing our thoughts and our experiences, to actually, or our feelings about those experiences, to create a more positive mindset, right? Because we can be very defeating of ourselves, right? And especially when it's something where we're hearing pressure from so many different places and we're already hard on ourselves, that can be debilitating when it comes to taking an exam.
So what about on test day? If I get there and things start to get tense, what should I do?
I would say really just start with some of those mindfulness techniques, right? And the nice thing with those is not a lot of people even know that you're doing them, right? The littlest thing is you can actually, what I was told is, and shown before, is actually you can trace your hand, right? And then, you breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Like little stuff like that, right? And people don't even realize that you're doing it. So it's not like you're drawing attention to yourself when you're in class, like, right? That could increase more stress or anxiety. But yeah, so you're actually, it's just little like mindfulness things. And again, just preparing, right? Big thing that I tell people is take practice tests, right? Arrive early, give yourself time to kind of settle in, right? Don't be all rushed just to get there. Then you get there and it's like all of a sudden you got to take that test right away.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to just increase more anxiety, right? And stress. Read the instructions, right? Make sure you're reading through everything, right? Take your time, okay? This is the biggest thing too with these time tests, right? Is I think people rush through, right? But in all reality, that's why taking those practice tests will help, because you can time yourself on each section, which gives you more confidence going into the exam that you're going to be able to complete everything in the right amount of time, but actually give each question the amount of time it deserves.
Yeah, I can try those. So also, are there any strategies you can use after the exam?
Yeah, so after the exam, I always just with anything in life, you got to go back and reflect, right? Reflect on, what do you think you could have done better? What do you feel, you did well, right? I would actually focus on more of a strength base first, right? What did I do well before what did I do bad?
Yeah.
Right? Just because that can that picks us up a little bit more versus putting us down, okay? Don't avoid just continuing to think about it, right? Once that test is over, once you submit it to the state, once it's done, right? You can create so much more stress and anxiety for yourself if you're just sitting there and you're like thinking, what did I get on it? What did I get on it? I hope I did well. I hope I did well, right? Because it's going to still be a little while before you get those results too. And practice self-care, right? After you're done with the test, go hang out with friends, right? Go to a sporting event, right? Do stuff that is going to make you feel good. Go play video games if video games is an outlet for you, right? Kind of reward yourself for that difficult day that you just went through. And you know, I don't know, get some ice cream, get, you know, your favorite snack or treat.
Cool. I gotta be honest, I'm still a little worried about this ACT.
The thing is like, in ACTs and standardized tests, there's always going to be a concern, right? Because for so many years, people have put so much pressure on these tests, right? I mean, I still remember me going to, you know, me in high school, right? And I'll share a little story about, you know, my experience. So when I was in high school, I went to Lincoln Way East, but when I was in high school, I actually ended up taking the ACT 3 times, okay? And I'm not afraid to admit that my highest score was a 19, right? That was two points lower than the state average, okay? But it never stopped me from accomplishing my goals. I knew in high school that I wanted to help people, and social work just so happened to be the field that I fell into, right? But a 19 on my ACT, even though it was a lot lower than my friends, everything like that, I never got denied to any college I ever applied to. A lot of it is, as long as you're having a good GPA behind it, you know, there's not so much held on the test. But also, I feel like colleges are looking for a well-rounded student as well, right? So if you're involved in clubs, activities, you know, things like that, that's gonna definitely benefit you, right? If you're working, even while you're, you know, in school, I think that definitely benefits you. And that's where, you know, ACT scores are just one piece of the puzzle. Like I said, I got a 19. You know, it didn't stop me from accomplishing my goals, right? I didn't even look at it as a barrier, right? And that's what I would want our students to look at. It's just like, that score doesn't define who you are as a person, right? And I applied at eight different undergrads, and I got into them. But Sommer, here's something interesting that I don't think a lot of people realize either, is that even if you don't do well on the ACT, or you don't maybe get into that college of your choice from the get-go, it's not the end of the world, right? And I think a lot of parents and family put that, you know, guardians and family put that pressure on us, right? Where it's like, no, you need to go to this school. And it's like, but even if you don't get in right out of high school, what I found is actually, and I've transferred too many times, but what I found is actually, if you're doing well in college, sometimes going in as a transfer student to another school can be a little easier as going in as undergrad. So that's kind of one thing I wanted to just share with everybody, you know, obviously, so just to let you know too, to ease some anxiety in yourself that, hey, you know, if I don't do well in the ACT, it's not the end of the world.
Thank you. I feel like my parents should hear some of this too. They see how I prepare and come home frustrated, and they worry a little. Sometimes they try to help, but that can go either way.
Yeah, so, and again, parents obviously just want the best. Parents and guardians want the best for their kids, right? But that's kind of what goes back to kind of what I was just saying, is the score on the ACT is not, it's just a part of you, right? It's not the end of the world. It doesn't define who you are, right? And a lot of times it's, you know, parents are putting that extra pressure because maybe they're looking for scholarship money or stuff like that, right? But there's so many other ways to get scholarships out there too, right? I don't even know if these websites are still around, but a little funny thing is, you know, when I was going to high school, I was looking up, there was a random website where you could look up, you know, random scholarships. One of them was making a tuxedo out of duct tape, and you submitted the picture and you could potentially win a scholarship. So you're just sharing that silly, goofy stuff, because in all reality, there's scholarships everywhere, right? So again, and it doesn't just define your ACT score, but your GPA contributes, right? And extracurriculars contribute. So that's one thing I would, you know, just really emphasize to the parents, especially with sharing my personal story, and also just, you know, kind of recapping here is, you know, just because your student doesn't do well on the ACT does not mean that, you know, that they're doomed for life.
Yeah, I'd definitely like them to hear some of that. Is there anywhere they can go to review this information?
Yeah, so you can look at our webpage, you know, it should be posted on our webpage, but actually Ms. Carla Erdy, our, you know, Director of Public Relations, she's actually gonna send this stuff out as well. So just look for it on the HF site, and just look for it, you know, possibly through Parent Square.
Oh, great, thank you. I'm sure these tips will help everyone out. For VTV, I'm Sommer Owens.
Thank you, Sommer.
You're welcome, thank you.